Good evening. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second session of tonight's PEO 2023 Council Elections All Candidates meeting. My name is Arthur Sinclair, and I will be the moderator for tonight's discussion. Tonight, we will hear from the candidates for Eastern Regional Councillor. The three candidates for this position are Michelle Yu, Joe Poderbarek, and Randy Walker. The electronic meetings with the candidates via webcast enable voters to learn more about the candidates and PEO issues, so more of them will vote. Voters will be able to post questions online in advance of the discussion. We're allowed to, excuse me. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. In accordance with the approved protocol for the all candidates meeting, as moderator, I may shorten the question and not read out preambles to questions, may select any questions, not necessarily the highest ranked, may remove offensive and duplicate questions, and may ask questions not on the platform. Each candidate will be provided 2 minutes for opening remarks. I will then direct a question to a candidate. That candidate will have 1 minute to respond to the question. After the candidate has responded, the two remaining candidates will each have 1 minute to address the first candidate's response to the question. Following the question period, the candidates will have 90 seconds each for closing remarks. The order of speakers was determined by a draw earlier this evening. The views and opinions expressed on this broadcast do not necessarily reflect the views of PEO and are the responsibility of the candidates. So without further delay, let's get started with opening remarks. The first candidate for Eastern Regional Councillor is Michelle Yu.
Thanks, Arthur there. Good evening. My name is Michelle Liu. I use she, her pronouns, and I live on traditional Algonquin territory. And I'm really proud to be here tonight as a queer and racialized and women identifying candidate. And so I'll maybe start by drawing your attention to three things about my candidacy. First, I have my finger on the pulse of the next generation of engineers. I currently chair the Waterloo Recent Engineering Alumni Council, where I work with nearly 13,000 engineering graduates of the last decade to build a more inclusive engineering community. I also co-fund Canada's very first university-level scholarship for 2S LGBTQ+ engineering students and have mentored over 150 undergraduate and graduate engineering students. So I have a good idea of what's going on there. And the second thing is that I have a working understanding of PEO statutory mandates and current strategic priorities. And so my PhD research actually focuses on the Professional Engineers Act, PEO policies, as well as Engineers Canada policies. And so, I've spent a lot of time with these documents. In terms of strategic priorities, I want to highlight that as an early career counselor, I stand to help PEO remain relevant and valuable to fellow early career engineers, other stakeholders per PEO's 2023-25 strategic goal. And lastly, I have formal training in law and policy. So in addition to my PhD, I'm also pursuing a law degree, which I'm on track to complete this spring. And so my legal training, I hope, will provide me with different skills and perspectives in developing practice standards and various policies that respond to the needs of our profession. I've also held a myriad of institutional leadership and community service roles over the years, including as an equity advisor of another regulatory body, the Law Society of Ontario, all of which are experiences that I plan to leverage as a PEO counselor. Thanks for having me here, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow candidates.
The second candidate for Eastern Regional Councillor is Joseph Poderbarek.
Good evening. I'd like to say hello to everybody in this new year, 2023, as we engage in our activities. Welcome Michelle and Randy. Good to see you guys as competitors opposed to an acclaimed area. What brings me to run in this election, just to stay as the chapter chair and other activities, is from my experience, what I've seen, the degradation of member engagement in the last few years. And I can bring experience to this table. I've done so in the past. I've got, we talked about inclusivity. I've had 40 years of proven track record of ensuring that there's no barrier to an engineer who is an engineer, regardless of whatever beginnings they have and give them opportunities. And I've done that in that way, being the D&D Aboriginal Advisory Group co-chair for the inaugural 3 years. I've got experience on that, plus being on a board of directors for 9 of 16 years of participation with a major union. I've had the experience of engaging with people across the country with different areas, looking at scholarship funds and demand. So all that experience I want to bring forward, because I see that we have lost track of our membership. The chapters due to COVID and all that have fallen astray. We see talk of governance. We see announcements coming across. And that's why I thought I'd jump in, not to malign the activities of the current incumbent councillor or others. It's just that we need a time for a change, put some experience background into what's going on, because we seem to be running out all different directions and not doing well at some. And that's what I hope to bring to this. And we'll have discussions later on this evening. Appreciate that time. Thank you.
Thank you. And the third candidate for Eastern Region Councillor is Randy Walker.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Joe and Michelle, for joining me this evening. I am currently the sitting senior regional councillor for this region. I have done so for 3.5 years now. My term will be up in end of April, early May. I am currently a practicing automation engineer, but with a varied background in construction and industrial, mechanical and electrical, as well as IT. Done quite a bit of IT programming for the company I used to work for in payroll and office materials for quite some time. I am currently also on the group for the committee. Sorry. This is new to me. I haven't done this before. The committee for finance. So it's one of the good committees to be on. But yes, I'd like to just say that I'm glad I've got some competition this year. I look forward to it. I won't be terribly upset if any one of our competition gets in, all very qualified people. But why I continue to run, this will be my last term allowed under the Act, we started a program basically 5 years ago now, to try and correct a lot of the woes that PEO has been going. And as Joe referenced, we have a lot of issues with direction problems. We have been trying to fix that. COVID did not help us. We should be leading a lot of metrics as far as Ontario professional engineers go for the country, and we mostly lag in all the metrics compared to all the other provinces. So I would like to finish up my mandate that we started 4 years ago approximately, and try to get the PEO back on track, and for the younger generation to have something to do and have a career. Thank you.
And that concludes the opening remarks segment. Now let's go to the questions. The order of questions will be in the same order as the opening remarks, and then we'll start rotating through. So the first question to Michelle, based on your knowledge of the Professional Engineers Act and the regulations, how would you describe PEO's core mandate?
Thanks, Arthur. So per Section 2.3 of the Act, PEO's principal or core mandate is to regulate the practice of professional engineering and to govern its members, so a slew of people, members, holders of certificates of authorization, holders of temporary licenses, and holders of provisional licenses, and holders of limited licenses, to govern all these groups in accordance with the Act and the regulations and bylaws under it, in order that the public interest may be served and protected. So that's the key there. And if we look at Section 2.4, the following section, we see that PEO has 5 additional mandates, the first 3 of which are to establish, maintain, and develop 1, standards of knowledge and skill among its members, standards of qualification and practice, and thirdly, standards of professional ethics. Plus, the 4th thing is to promote public awareness of the role of PEO. So a little bit of promotion there. And lastly, to perform other duties and exercise under the powers that arise under this Act.
Thank you very much. And Joe, PEO's core mandate.
That's a curious question, Art, because, it makes it sound like there only is one, item there, one mandate, core, or a priority one. And as Michelle outlined, there's a series of subsets of that activity, but in essence, is to protect the public. And that's what the self-regulatory aspect is supposed to do, is to ensure that we have activities and procedures in place in order to validate a person's educational background and experience, and then also look at the ethical aspects and how they work and how they treat. And I think one of these things is also working with other organizations across Canada for mobility, which seems to be an issue that seems to be forgotten, that no longer will you grow up and be raised in a city someplace and stay and remain and work there till your retirement. It's going to be a fluid environment, including overseas as well. So as much as we see people coming in that way. So the mandate there is, as we look at the licensure and also regulations around that, and also discipline for when they're transgressed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Randy?
Thank you, Michelle, for that great intro. I don't have to repeat that now,
which is great. If you look online, and people generally have, our core mandate is to serve and protect the public interest. But we are more, unfortunately, than this simple statement. We write regulation for a varied amount and a lot of government. We deal with the bad actors who would try to besmirch us and steal the engineering license without actually being licensed. In conjunction with Engineers Canada, we set our education levels, as Michelle alluded to, for our up-and-coming students so they are well trained. We license immigrants who want to work in this great province. We do a very many tasks in the name of the public interest. We're not doing them very well, and we need to get back to this core mandate that we have in order to and get rid of our less important tasks. Our house needs to be put in order, which is what we've been trying to do now for 4 years. And we have a few more, probably another 4 or 5 years to go. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we start rotating through the question to Joe. And what do you see as your role as a councillor, that is, as a member of the board of directors in the fulfillment of PEO's mandate?
Yes, there's always a naive aspect that you're going to join council or a board of directors somewhere and make that phenomenal amount of change and go in there, beat your shoe on the table and fight for the voters who got. But there's also a duality of that environment. And I see the councillor in the regional sense is to be the earpiece to the members and through the executives of the region itself to hear what the issues are and concerns and lack of communication. As well, at the same time, when you participate, the fiduciary responsibility at the board level is very important because all the support staff, the operations aspect, have to somehow be funded using the dues that come in. And there you're looking at the management aspect and the policy and the metrics you want to measure. So it's a dual role you have, but one shouldn't be subsumed into the purely corporate nature of PEO and say we're fighting for all this stuff, as we've heard, governance, and then forget about the guys who pay the dues and the ones who actually put you there and have interests. At the same time, you can't come in there with a singular issue and forget about all the rest, because how should I put it? You want to have good service, you got to pay for it. That's what staff is. Thank you. Sorry.
And the first response goes to Randy.
Thank you, Arthur.
Role of councillor.
I see the regional councillors having a dual role, as Joe alluded to. We have a responsibility to the public, but we also have a responsibility as a regional councillor to the members of our region. We have to, as a councillor, not the regional style, but just as a straight councillor, of which there's over 20 of us that do this work, rating around, we ensure the staff has the direction and the mandate to get their jobs done. That it's direct, it's clear, it's measurable. We have spent way too long having mandates put out by council that weren't measurable. Just we do things, but we don't know what to do with it. We don't measure it, in the end it's done. So I see my role as to, one, ensure that's occurring, but number two, ensure that we are trying to be heard, which in the last few years has been very difficult with COVID and with our membership. And so they're well represented. And we really aren't well represented even at this level right now of how we do it. So changes need to be made.
Thank you. Michelle. Role of
So similarly, I see the councillor role as centering on the management and, of course, administration of PEO affairs per, the Act, Section 3, I believe. including tasks as, such as governance, regulatory, and others. I think that's typically the three categories, but especially governance. And I really want to highlight that I believe that upholding the fiduciary duty that councillors owe to PEO per the council manual is a critical part of this role. And that, includes ensuring that you're competent as a councillor and getting the training that you need if you're not, given that the decisions you make can really influence not only the image of the profession, but also the regulator's ability to regulate in the interest of the public.
Thank you. So, bit of SWOT analysis: strengths, opportunities, threats. What do you see as the most important challenge facing PEO today? That is, what should council do to address this challenge? And the next question first goes to Randy.
As the incumbent, I found this
What
one
an interesting question. And I actually see our biggest challenge is a split council. Our council right now is not aligned. We are segregated and separated on the direction that PEO should function, with a lot of infighting, and it's really bad. We make decisions, and those decisions are not supported by those who didn't like the decisions, and they are constantly fighting and wasting time and wasting energy in order to try and get these things reversed. As a councillor, I may not like a decision, but I will support the decision if it's made by the group, as a good democracy does. And I will always do that, and I will always support that sort of thing. But right now, with the infighting we have with council and the multiple directions that the groups want to run, and external groups who have a lot of influence on council, the E4P group specifically, I don't see us in good shape unless we can deal with that problem.
Thank you. And first response to Michelle. Important challenge PEO today.
As an outsider, I sort of see the licensing process and low rate of licensure among especially CAB graduates as, among the most important challenges facing PEO today. A 2021 stat from Engineers Canada showed that only 44.6% of the 2015 graduating cohort obtained their license in 2019. And I know not everyone does it in 4 years, but that's just an example. And we know that when we lose more female candidates along the pipeline, and Engineers Canada and provincial regulators don't collect data on other identities, so we don't even know what's going on in those other areas. And so on. And so, which is another important challenge in terms of data collection. And so what should council do? Well, I'm encouraged by the 2023 to 25 strategic goal of improving the licensing process, including ensuring all licensing incentives or activities, reflect the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so council should, fulfill this goal as a means to addressing these challenges.
Thank you. And the last response put to Joseph.
Yes, important features. Member engagement, I put that forward. With COVID-19 in the last 3 years, we've put ourselves in a strange position of distancing ourselves from members, and comments we saw from the Caton report saying, we'll get rid of chapters, and then someone holding my hand saying, don't worry, chapters are going to continue. But no one defines what the role of a chapter will be in the regulatory mode in the future. That's one of the shortcomings on that. So I feel we need to do a bottoms-up revitalization. Put members out there and find out, what do you want? We used to have face-to-face town halls in regions. We don't have that. We have CPD coming. It's all been announced secondhand. You've been seeing more correspondence on that than anything else. But the biggest hurdle is going to be part of FARPACTA, because no longer will we have EITs after July 2023. It's all going to disappear. And that's our major way of approaching people in universities and various institutions on saying this is the value of PEO. Whereas OSPEs, they're advertising themselves. We have no input, and you have to arrive at the table with all your credentials. Anyway, those are my concerns. One of them, many.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question goes to first to Michelle. So a strategic goal in PEO's 2023-25 strategic plan is to ensure all stakeholders see relevance and value in PEO. And reflecting on this goal, whom would you identify as some of PEO's key stakeholder groups or organizations? And what do you think meaningful and appropriate engagement with specific stakeholder groups might look like?
So building on my earlier point about the low rate of licensure among CAB graduates, I would identify engineering students and EITs, especially those in computer software or other high-tech areas, as among the key stakeholders when it comes to PEO's relevance and value. We know that all 12 provincial regulators, along with Engineers Canada, issued a recent reminder about the protected title in terms of software engineering practitioners, and reminder was aimed at, those in high-tech areas, including software. And while this enforcement is within PEO's mandate, I think we should also be focusing on the question of, why aren't these computer and software engineering grads getting licensed or seeing value in this license? And so Section 2.4 of the Act says that PEO should promote awareness of its role and the license and the professional body. And so doing more promotion with early undergrad students in these particular programs, for example, is likely among the ways to becoming more relevant to them.
Thank you. And to Joe, engagement of stakeholder groups.
Okay. Interesting topic. We keep hearing COVID-19 is the excuse of why we haven't engaged various stakeholders. We know who they all are. We have all this ability. So I wonder what happened. There's no consultation, no vision on that, and strategic outreach to these various organizations. We saw the 30 by 30 initiative kind of close its doors, which I participated at the local level. I always asked the question, what happens the day after the deadline? And then we said, well, our mandate ends. It's an Engineers Canada thing. And then I looked at the fact that in having women getting their license by 2030 really stops at 2026 because you need your 4 years experience. I said, this got to be an ongoing program, but it seems to be doors closed, don't talk about it anymore. And that's the kind of aspect of the strategic plan. It kind of talks about all these nice governance things, but the reality on how it functions is really lacking in many ways, the commitment and the resolve.
Thank you. And to Randy.
So that's a great question. Stakeholder engagement has been a serious problem as far as I can go back. That's 16, 17 years now. Been a major issue. Going through the chapter system is not a correct method that I can see that has ever been successful in engagement. I personally would like to see each discipline, meaning external to the PEO, have a core group run by companies, educational institutions that the PEO can communicate with. So we have a group of stakeholders who can be communicated with. Chapters are a resource, but they do not have the depth of scope or engagement to properly review regulatory and practicing engineering needs. The core groups who have concerns and know the current and upcoming issues work with PEO to adjust regulation and the cooperation of the government so that the public is properly served. As PEO is a regulatory body, we act as the go-between between the private interest groups and the public interest that is paramount. And that's how we should work. That's my opinion.
So staying on the subject matter of stakeholders, the first one goes to Joseph on this one. Describe the ideal relationship between PEO and the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers and any similar advocacy-focused stakeholder organizations.
Excellent question, Art. The thing is, very few people understand the difference between OSPI and PEO on the inside, never mind the outside public. And it's most embarrassing when I go to an event and they say at the Science Tech Museum and they say, the engineers were here yesterday. What they meant was the OSPI guys had an event yesterday. So the relationship has to be, they are advocates for engineers. We have to ride with them to show ourselves as being the regulators, to make that understanding quite clear, and have ride on the issues. If you look at their website, all the environmental climate change issues, we're kind of how do you do regulation? There's emerging technologies. It was mentioned on software. We haven't captured that to define what it is so we can regulate it. So it becomes something that if it's not captured, not regulated, it'll happen on its own. And then you hear guys in industry and the high tech, well, I don't need to be a PNG because they'll just punish me and they can't control what I do. And that's the thing we have to look and listen and learn to, is get those emerging technologies and innovations, because that's the way of the future, not regulating old style stuff, shall we say, mechanical, civil, etc.
Thank you.
Sorry.
And to Randy.
Well, PEO does not have I think, a personally good relationship with OSPI at this time. So I think a respectful working relationship would be a good start. There's been lots of documentation put out that supports that particular claim. As OSPI is the voice of Ontario engineers, I believe all engineers should be part of OSPI, not mandated, like completely mandated. Everybody that's an engineer is part of OSPI. So they have the funds to fulfill their mandate and work on behalf of all engineers to represent the public, which they do not have now. So all that we do in our daily lives, we do behind the scenes. We need that group to have the mandate to properly go out and show how important our profession is to the world, because good engineering makes for a clean world that is well fed and safe. And without us, we revert back, centuries or not decades, which is where we're going. Thank you.
And the last response to Michelle.
Yeah, I'll agree with Randy that PEO should have a symbiotic or good working relationship with OSPI and other advocacy bodies. PEO regulates and OSPI advocates. And in fact, many other professions have this division of mandates. Our lawyers have the Law Society of Ontario for regulation and the Ontario Bar Association for advocacy. Doctors have the College of Physicians and Surgeons for regulation and the Ontario Medical Association for advocacy. So the way I see the PEO and OSPI relationship is sort of, like this. If the engineering profession is a circle, PEO decides who gets to be in the circle, disciplines those in the circle who fail to meet, certain standards, and make sure no one pretends they're in the circle when they're not supposed to, when they're not. And OSPI, on the other hand, showcases the circle to the public and policymakers and says, here's what the circle wants to see in public policy, and here are the ways that the circle enhances, Ontario's economy, quality of life, and so on.
Thank you. So next question is going to be about licensing. It's going to go to Randy first, then Michelle, then Joseph. From a public protection standpoint, what, if any, value do you see in PEO's efforts to streamline the licensure of engineering graduates, Canadian or international? What, if any, opportunities are created by a recent government changes, example, amendments to the Fair Access to Regulated Professions and Compulsory Trades Act, or for PACTA?
So, as this has been an ongoing issue for decades now, again, 17 years, we haven't gotten much better. This should not have taken an act of government to force us to do it. We should have been the leader a long time ago. But I believe a thorough review, consultation with the accredited institutions, the public and private sector, if we want to do FAR PACTA, we have to understand what the institutions, the industrial, the commercial, of all these private and public sector employees, we need everybody's input to bring a properly balanced approach to licensing graduates and for people coming to the country who are looking for a better life, so they can be properly reviewed and brought into the system, and make sure that the cheaters who are trying to get in through the back door don't, so that our public is kept safe and our group is kept to a very high standard, which is what engineering is all about.
Thank you. Michelle.
Just building off of that, I think an obvious value is, the compliance with the statutes, but, which leads to, I think, greater public confidence in the professional regulators' ability to protect the public, among other things. And I think changes that PEO is making as a result of for PACTA include, reaching registration decisions within 6 months of receiving complete license applications, as we know. And this particular change, I think, is likely very valuable to prospective licensees. And I talked about, the low licensing rate a couple of times now. Well, I'm sure the lengthy wait time, especially in the last few years, has deterred a lot of people from either launching the process at all or following through with it, especially those in high-tech fields who we just talked about, whose employers, for example, often view the license as, a bonus, but not necessarily or not a necessity. And so I see the ability to increase the number of licensees as really among the values here.
Thank you. And the last response to Joe, with respect to
on
licensure and for PACTA.
Yeah, on the surface, FAR PACTA sounds like a great thing. Speed things through, get people from other places of experience. When you start digging down, and one of the things Randy put down, we've got to do all this. This has been around since 2006 as an act. It's nothing new. It's been many, many years in the place. We got council reacting to it in 2022, and the changes, the academic requirements are pretty straightforward. That's what Engineers Canada is able to do, is go back and trace the qualifications of people. Experience requirements, that's going to be a bit difficult. If you look at all the world's environments to say, okay, what experience does constitute something of value that's applicable to engineering? Who's going to do that? And it's going to take a little bit of effort and preparation of staff work on that aspect. But the biggest challenge I keep saying is there'll be no EIT program. You show up with your application with your 4 years in hand, not as you're preparing the 4 years. And that's where we have to kind of be more creative and nimble and go back to the middle schools with STEM, for instance, and in our northern areas of Ontario and other areas, and promote engineering in the middle schools before you get to in the high school to get to engineering. Otherwise, you've lost it. I talked too much, sorry.
So the next question touches on licensure again, and we'll go to Michelle, then Joe, and then Randy. From the audience questions, there are many Indigenous communities facing severe infrastructure failures, lack of access to clean drinking water, inadequate housing, energy, food. What will you do to work towards truth and reconciliation and welcome with licensing more Indigenous engineers?
I was really so glad to see this question come up in the poll there. So thank you to whoever asked it. I'll certainly leverage existing instruments like the Anti-Racism and Equity Code that Council approved just earlier this year, or last year, I guess, to try to get PEO as a regulator to better acknowledge and help address the infrastructure challenges and broader challenges facing Indigenous communities, among other things. And I begin all of my speaking engagements with land acknowledgement, and I always see raised eyebrows in engineering audiences, especially. And so, to the settlers in the room who don't know, Indigenous peoples have very long-standing relationships with the land and water of Turtle Island, on which over 300,000 engineers carry out their professional duties, 87,000 of which are under the regulation of PEO. And so regulators created and empowered by colonial statutes, along with engineering schools that are colonial in nature, are composed of largely settlers like us, like me, on Turtle Island, who garner privilege from and continue to reap the benefits of colonial violence against Indigenous peoples. And so our duty toward truth and reconciliation as engineers is unmistakable. And
first response to Joe.
Yeah, it's a very timely question, but also something that should have been in existence. I hark her back to my mid-90s when I joined the D&D Aboriginal Advisory Group, and not being Indigenous at that point, learned a lot about the treaties and how things were decided years ago and how nothing's been adjusted. And what I see is the importance, and I saw my son do that when he stepped out into the northern reaches of Ontario to do the STEM program and meeting at various schools and coming back having learned a lot more than I think he provided to others, because of his textbook learning of science and engineering aspects of it all. And it just goes to show you that it just can't be talk, it's got to be actual action. And then we've got a northern region as well. And it's always thinking of in the regional council meetings we've got is to find out what goes on up there, because we keep thinking of the GTA as the center of the universe where you can take a tram to some other area and meetings up there. It's quite a trek in the eastern region where we are. It's far, but not like it is up north. And also the environment is completely different. And we can learn a lot more about what goes on and how we can help, not to teach, but to invite.
And Randy.
Well, I am not really qualified to answer that question, as I am not Native. I do live beside a Native group. And what I do know is that the PEO as a regulatory body has no real voice at this time to be able to mandate change for any of the Indigenous people, which I find very unfortunate. The technology available to us now can properly help most Indigenous sites if the governments and the people put it forth to get it done. I don't see the will of the people, and engineers included, going along with government to pressure them even remotely nearly enough to properly go in and use the technology available that we have now to make their lives better. There's a lot of history of issues going on because each nation is different and controlled differently. So this is not an easy question to answer. That's why I really don't feel qualified to answer it.
Thank you. This next question, again from the online set of questions. First to go to Joseph. Do you believe that the composition of council in its current form is adequate to ensure the public interest is protected and it does not pose any risk to self-regulation?
It's interesting because the council is made up of what I see a curious amount. You got a president, a past president, a president-elect, where why don't we just have one president? When we have VPs, which are sitting for longer terms as opposed to learner. I know we've got 2 councillors per region, so that sounds sacrilegious, but we could do with 1. The lieutenant governor appointees, I think, are a good added benefit because they provide balance, because engineers are always have a problem, solve the problem, think I'm right, even though I'm challenged. the soft skills of the current society. And when we talk about this whole modern governance aspect of it all, the idea of directing and saying this is the rule, etc., kind of gone. We have to start looking at consensus building and understanding and developmental positioning. And that's why the council is really important. And I heard Randy talk about the differences and all that. It's one of the things in my previous council, I saw the exact same thing. It's not unique. And I look at myself as being independent. I will not be influenced by cliques saying, right, I'm going to get benefits, etc. It's just not the way to do it. Otherwise, don't go to meetings.
And Randy,
So
council composition.
Is an interesting question that's been discussed for all 17 years I've been in the system. We discussed it. Does it need to be bigger? Does it need to be smaller? Any smaller group is an agile group. However, you lose out very quickly on points of view. So if you had a small group of people, they can do very quick decision making, be a very wonderful group to get something done. Is it the right direction? We don't know. As Joe pointed out, I firmly believe we don't require 2 councillors per region. I think one would be fine with a second person, basically being trained to be replacement, but not an acting voice or a voting member. There's the size. I think the size is fine. 15 to 20 people, I think is plenty to properly have a correct voice and a representation. Will that continue? I don't know. But as far as it goes, I would like to see some changes made to it.
Thank you. It's Michelle, council composition.
Yeah, I'll similar to Randy, I'll echo Randy in that I think that having more, differently identified and situated individuals on council will only benefit PEO's ability to serve the interest of a highly diverse public and make it a regulator that the public and, the engineering community can be more confident in. And I'm not saying that people should be like tokenized or forced to speak on behalf of the community or communities they belong to, but the odds of diverse perspectives arising is just higher when you bring differently identified people to the table, include them, and most importantly, empower them to contribute.
That's a great answer.
Thank you. All right. So a little bit more just reasonably open-ended. We're talking about the PO, then we're going to get into a little bit more about yourselves. And the next one's to Randy first. So what weakness, if any, should PEO seek to improve in its role as a regulator or in its governance model?
Was this one of the questions we had previously?
Oh, soups. So in my fallibility, I wanted to go to what is the...
There it is. I found it. 16.
Council is a weakness unto itself. I keep saying that. I know it's a terrible thing as a council member to say that, but I've watched even previously before my going on to council fights a lot. We have a group of people who sometimes don't read all their goals. They waste time at council meetings. We do not get nearly as much decisions made. And I see that as a terrible thing. We have decision reversal. We have infighting that makes us weak and it makes us ineffective. And honestly, if we want to be as role as a regulator and a governance model, we need to properly be fulfilled as from council is in a single direction. As Joe has pointed out multiple times, we need to bring engagement. We have people who bring an opinion but have no backing. We need people that bring evidence of why their opinion matters or why they think the way they should to sway the proper methods. We don't do that, and it needs to change. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle,
Oh, sorry. So I think one of the greatest weaknesses of all engineering regulators, not just PEO, is really the reliance, I think, on volunteers who are, of varying competencies and of experiences and so on. And I think a more, appropriate roles and powers that volunteers could hold are ones established through some sort of risk-based approach and come with a level of training and accountability structure that reflects the scope of that particular role. Engineers Canada actually has an article on volunteer boards and self-regulating professions that sort of affirms the need to ensure that volunteers, do not hold roles that they're untrained or unqualified for, especially roles in which they would be responsible for decisions that affect the operations and reputation of the profession. And I think this is something that is currently happening at the PEO.
Thank you. And to Joseph.
Okay, One of the big weaknesses is not using the chapter system. And when I say that, it's not just as a workforce, but also as a sandbox training environment for people who are in the workforce to learn the soft skills and the abilities to do various types of risk management and aspects of that nature. We've got areas of, we've seen weaknesses such as the unilateral cessation of the printed copy dimensions, and that all of a sudden brings to a point where we saved all this money, but we're going to throw a couple $100,000 away because of cost of a paper copy. The rollout of CPD, we're not going to argue the merits of what it is, but we see these presentations made out of what you're going to do, and I keep getting questions of what qualifies as this stuff. So one of the weaknesses is that we're too focused in on internal governance, all the rule sets around how we're going to do business. We should say, here's the objective, here's the goals, staff, put together the plans, and fund them and put them in place so they can actually undertake that work. I'm looking at the time, and I'm on time almost. Sorry.
Thank you. And moving right along, same question, but different flip. And so what is PO's most apparent strengths as a regulator? That was open-ended question, and that one goes to Michelle.
I think, PEO has strength in numbers, right? Like its policies can affect around 30% of all licensed engineers in Canada and set a tone on various issues for the entire profession across the country. And for example, the Law Society of Ontario, also the largest regulator of lawyers in Canada, was among the provincial regulators that led the implementation of an EDI module within their mandatory CPD program, and others followed. So it set a national tone on the importance of EDI within a profession, which makes me think that one of PEO's strengths is that it has the critical mass to do something similar and to be a leader in professional regulation.
Thank you. Joseph?
Yeah, it's obvious what the PEO strengths are. Being a regulator, and you read in the blue pages of Dimensions magazine all the transgressions and how they treat these people and how they go through a fair hearing and allow people to set their situations up and then make a documented assessment and punishment aspect. That kind of puts a shock into those who want to slip away and practice engineering without authorization and the licensure, at the same time put confidence in the hands of public. And we saw this we keep talking about CPD and PEAK program, but all of that also demonstrated the ability of PEO to respond to situations, albeit reactively, to where there was lack of confidence of the public in our safety self-regulatory aspects. So there's a strength there in that they're doing that element of it well, albeit it's just for traditional engineering technologies and aspects.
Thank you. And the last response to Randy for this question.
One thing I see as our best
strength as a regulator is actually our working relationship with the provincial government. Our provincial relationship has never been so good. That started over a decade ago with a mandated effort to get better involvement with our government. And that has led to a lot of things between not the chapter system, between the council itself and our working groups inside of the PEO to have not a backdoor in, but a constant working relationship back and forth. The obvious weakness of that, however, is if we don't keep up to the current crises or we take excessively long to make decisions, then the government kind of runs along without us and we lose our ability to have proper input. Without that input, then we are no longer doing our job as a regulator. So we need exploit the strength of a regulator with that relationship and get better at getting this stuff in so that we correctly represent the public in the best way possible.
Thank you. Now I'm going to try my best to squeeze a little bit more into this. So I'm going to summarize this quick. And this next one goes to Joseph. Could you describe involvement you've had as a volunteer at PO and as a two-parter? What do you think is the appropriate role for volunteers at a regulatory body?
Oh, a lot to pack in there. So my PEO experience became in 2011 when I moved from a board of directors on a union because of my job change. And I wanted to bring the skill sets there to see how I could do it. And I got involved with the government liaison program at first. And as Randy said, a very good opportunity in starts to talk to the lawmakers. And so my role has been in various capacities of assistance and to do succession planning, treasurer, bylaws, chair, and all that. and all this other activities. Role of the volunteer in the chapter is very important, as that's the executive member which has the first exposure to formalized fiduciary responsibility. In a company, you can hide behind a signature of someone else, but when you have direct fiduciary responsibility, and maybe people don't understand that, on the decision-making process and the rolling of eyes during meetings of why you make a motion to seconding, all starts to become real when you start tabulating all the impacts. And also, they're the face to the other members who have questions, and also they're the ones who bring in new volunteers that we really need. So it's more than just the work.
Randy, volunteers.
So I was a chapter member
Member for 15 years, 7 as a chair, 7 as a past chair, 1 year as the intro set. Now, and being with the current council as a regulatory group, there's no real position for volunteers from the chapter. That being said, we, or the group as chapters, are a path for well-trained council members who can get the correct training before becoming councillors. The volunteers are a very valuable resource and should not be lost, but they should be trained, molded, shaped, and channeled so that when they become, or if they want to become council members, they are fully ready to go, hitting the floor running with zero requirements for training and for input. They already know all the events. They know how to be part of council, and they're just ready to be a force to be reckoned with. That's how I see the appropriate role for councils and volunteers.
Thank you. And to Michelle, you're a volunteer in the role of volunteer.
Yeah, so my service to PEO and I guess Engineers Canada over the years include with Engineers Canada's Futures of Accreditation initiative recently, PEO's 30 by 30 action planning since about 2019, secretary and board member of PEO Grand River. So I moved from the Western to Eastern now, but the Grand River chapter for about 2 years. And before that, as an undergraduate liaison for about 5 years. If not, what volunteers should do more of in this context, I think just echoing the training comments earlier, is to be willing to receive more policy and governance training if they are willing, going to be involved in directing the regulatory body. I think we all know that other than one engineering law and ethics course in undergrad, most engineers don't have any legal or policy understanding, which I think is pretty important for a board. I think it's dangerous to allow, unqualified, untrained volunteers to have that sort of power.
Thank you. Now, this will be the last question I generally like to end on this question, and you can, because it's open-ended, it's about you. What is the one thing you want voters to know about you? And that first goes to Randy.
No pressure here. Thanks. One thing I'd like
The voters to know about me is that, one, I've been doing this for 4 years now, and I bring a very varied skill set to the table. Not as much as Michelle, apparently, but she is a poster child for getting stuff done. Wow. I wish I was at her age had as much done already, but that unfortunately is a long time in the past. What I want the groups to know is that I'm here. I've been doing the job. There's a lot to still do, and along as PEO. And one of the ones, I'm glad that last question was brought up right before this, because one of my things that I've been trying to push is to get the volunteers trained. And without training, we have it's not very good for them coming in. We waste like 6 months to a year when a volunteer comes in. And I'm not the future of engineering. I am an older person now. The council doesn't really represent the people, who are retiring.
Am I out already? I thought I had 2 minutes. Never mind.
We're not closing remarks. It's just.
I'm sorry.
And then next goes to Michelle. What's the one thing you want voters to know about you?
I think it's really that, early in my undergrad, I identified the lack of diverse individuals, equitable policies, and inclusive spaces as among the greatest challenges facing the engineering profession. And these are issues that I will endeavor to put front and center as a councillor. I don't mean advocacy, that's for OSPE, but I mean trying to ensure that PEO's governance and regulatory activities all uphold equity, diversity, and inclusion principles. And we talked about becoming, for PACTA, compliant with a new amended FARPACTA, and that'll remove some of the inequities in the licensing process, for example. But we have so much more work to do to catch engineering up to fellow, public serving, self-regulated professions like law and medicine, when it comes to not just bringing diverse people to the door, but giving them what they need so that they feel included and choose to stay in the profession.
Thank you. And last response to Joe.
Yes, thank you, Arthur. So one thing about me, I want to create an environment where everyone belongs. So you accommodate differences, create choices for involvement, use a different management style than directing things. Look at issues and situations, respect competence and initiatives far, and then, and nourish retention. That's one of the big problems we're going to have, is retaining those who already exist, as we'll see. As a second generation immigrant, I look at all the problems and issues coming, and I lived all of those back in the 60s and 70s before it was taboo to talk against stuff. So I have that feeling aspect. And I have to do self-mentoring, because at that time you didn't basically go ahead and say, okay, what advice do you have? It was all driven, hardworking, just trying to make the ends meet type of aspect of it. So started off, being a trained machinist as well as stationary engineer licensed in Ontario while doing engineering school, and then get licensure in 1986. And then also got my project management professional designation in 93 at the beginnings of all that, and working at the Defense Department, which allows me to explore engineering and we have funded projects. And I bring all of that expertise to the table, and that's why I see. Anyway, sorry about that. I take more time than I've got. Sorry.
All right. So that concludes the question portion of the meeting. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. So now each candidate has 90 minutes. Oh, sorry, 90 seconds. I got to follow the script better. 90 seconds for closing remarks. So in the same order as the opening remarks, the first remarks go to the first closing remarks to Michelle.
Yeah, I guess I'll just reiterate three things. I guess as an early career counselor, I will be, a voice of the future. And even though I am an early career candidate, I have working understanding of the statutory mandates of PEO and current strategic priorities, given that these are the focus of my work and my research. And I will leverage my formal training in law and policy in developing practice standards and various policies that respond to the ever-changing needs of our profession. And most importantly, as a counselor, I will endeavor to move the dial on EDI by raising awareness of these issues and helping council hold itself accountable in its truth and reconciliation efforts, among others. And I'm delighted to see that the Eastern Regional Councillor seat will be in very good hands, no matter the outcome. And I welcome anyone with further questions for me to reach out directly. And thank you, Arthur, and to Joe and Randy for the discussion.
Thank you very much. Joe, your closing remarks.
Geez, we're at the end already. That's so fast. Final words. I've considered running for regional council for a number of years, but you want to give it a appropriate amount of time and effort on that. And my motivation for joining council was, and still is, I want to leave PEO in a better state than I found it. So I want to see how the next generation will build on this success. And I understand, and I welcome Michelle there getting involved, and the chapter itself in the Ottawa area. There's always open doors, one way or the other. We'll get this cross paths again. But the whole aspect is we can't just stay in where we were. We have to move forward. It's a time of reflection and change. We're now in the third year of disruptions due to the pandemic, and the continuity of services with the members is a cornerstone, I think, for this year coming up. And we have to stop looking inward at our navels at governance and saying how to make the rules better. We've got staff that have already been outlined and prepared to do that. Let them do their job. And I think as role as council to sit there and see how they're done and what the successes are and failures, and make adjustments as we go, but not to preoccupied with one thing. Got to get back to basics. Anyway, thank you very much for the evening.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Michelle.
Randy, your closing remarks.
Mine. Sorry, Arthur, I
Stole your thunder there. So my 90 seconds. What I'd like to see is PEO and what we keep working towards, equity, inclusion, licensing, is that it should be an outcome. We shouldn't have to fight for it. It should already be part of our mandate, so that any individual coming in who, we could take two people who have identical backgrounds, identical training, yet we have two different outcomes. And that could be based on name, that could be based on age, it could be based on sex, how they identify, because we still have a fair amount of problems within PEO itself. But what I'm working towards with the group and the council is so that our mandate is an outcome where people don't have to fight for this anymore. It just happens. People are treated fairly. People are treated equally. And when they finish up with us and become a part of our group, they can say, I enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed the path. And I'm going to enjoy being an engineer. For the people above the age of 30, that's irrelevant. They've already got their engineering degrees. It's irrelevant what we do now. But it's all the people coming up through the schools. It's all the people who are coming to this country and coming to this province who want to be engineers. We want to ensure that their experience is positive and fulfilling so that they have a life as an engineer as they want. Thank you.
Thank you. So this concludes tonight's discussion. I would very much like to thank the candidates for their participation and also those watching online for their interests.
We have 5 minutes left. Arthur, are you going to dance for us?
I was told very clearly I better to end a little bit early than to go late. I want to thank everybody online for watching and for your interest, and thank you for taking an interest in the governance of the engineering profession. I hope you have found the meeting to be informative and worthwhile. As a reminder, a recording of all meetings will be on PEO's website for the duration of the election. Thank you again to everyone for participating in our discussion, and remember, your profession matters. So does your vote. Voting is quick and easy. You can vote on the internet or by phone. Voting opens on January 13th and closes at 4 p.m. on February 17th. All the information you need is on our website, www.peo.on.ca. Good night.
Thanks a lot.